Hello again, friends. So yesterday you guys had your quiz over part one of Things Fall Apart, and many of you did very well, so good job on that. Let's start today with a fun fact. So I always go back and look at the questions to see if there were any that, most people missed, and there was only one question that more than half of you missed, and ironically, it was a question that I had actually discussed in one of my videos. So I guess that means y'all don't watch my videos. Anyway, okay, let me tell you what question it was. It was the one about the meaning of the word Agbala. And last week I was doing one of my videos and I started talking about gender roles and how interesting it was the treatment of women, or the mistreatment, I guess, of women, but then also that hidden reverence that there seems to be towards the female figure in Igbo society. And I mentioned the word Agbala and how it technically means woman, but it has some other meanings as well. So yeah, I gave you the answer to that one if you watched my video. It's okay. I forgive you. I know you guys have a lot of things going on. For those of you who are watching my videos, I hope that they're giving you some, insight, or I'm helping to highlight important parts of the novel that might help with your overall comprehension. And then also like an analysis of why this book is important, why it is so powerful, and why it's more and more becoming one of those go-to books for AP and the College Board to reference in their classes, their course materials, and their tests. So now we're ready to start part two. And I guess we should just take a minute to talk about the ending of part one. Let's talk about Okonkwo for a second and where he is. So at the end of part one, he is exiled. He's exiled from Umofia, from his community. And okay, great irony here. He's actually exiled for a crime that was a total accident. I find that ironic because here's a dude who has done all these other things throughout part one, throughout, the story of his life, these violent tendencies against his wife. He beats her, he fires the gun. There's, all of these things that he could be considered guilty of. And the one thing that he's severely punished for is an accident. That kind of blows my mind. It's really because an accidental killing is considered a female crime. Oh, you killed someone in accident. If you kill someone on purpose, that's a masculine kind of thing. So while you might be punished, it's a little more forgivable. Yeah, I get it. That seems a little bit confusing in terms of our modern and American mindset. But that's really it, because this society places such great emphasis on masculinity and their idea of what it means to be a man, that is what he ends up being exiled for. And so he loses everything. He loses everything that he has built his entire life, everything that he's dedicated his life to, that he's worked for. It's gone. It's wiped out. I mean, like they burn it. They destroy everything on his land because it's this idea of we have to cleanse it for this crime. And for 7 years, he's exiled, sent to go and live in the village of his mother's family. I mean, that's such a huge insult to Okonkwo's own sense of masculinity and his definition of being a man. And now he has to go live with the woman's side of his family. That's going to be really hard for him to handle, and that's the first thing that I really want you to pay attention to as you start reading part two, is his reaction to this exile, and then the advice that he gets from the outside, and then how he has to move on from there, to rediscover his sense of identity, to rebuild a life for himself after everything has been wiped away. Continuing our thoughts about Okonkwo and the ending of part one, I also want you to consider all of the foreshadowing. It's almost as if what happens to Okonkwo is inevitable, and all of that can be traced back to the killing of Ikamafuna. I mean, Obierica tells Okonkwo afterward that, hey, buddy, your part in killing this kid would not have pleased the gods. Okay, this child calls you father, and then you help kill him. Yeah, that bodes not poorly. That bodes poorly for your future. So even as a reader, we of course see the foreshadowing, but even as a member of the Igbo society, culturally, you would see that as an omen. Okay, foreboding, this idea that you have done something that's going to alter your future. And it perhaps has changed your chi. Remember that personal God that was kind of responsible for your good luck or your bad luck for your destiny. So it's an almost inevitable progression, like you're just waiting for whatever it is to happen to Okonkwo, and it's been building since the killing of Ikamafuna. And sure enough, we see it at the ending of part 1. Also, before you move on to part 2, I would want you to stop and consider those things in the norms and values chart I talked about a day or two ago. Maybe you had time to do that. I think it's very important in your understanding of Igbo society, so that you can start to consider why this new culture brought by the white man has such an impact on these people. Okay, and I kind of made a little list over here for me to remind you of a few things. So go back and consider the role of the family dynamic, how they work amongst themselves, multiple wives and responsibilities, relationships that husbands and wives have with each other, that relationships that the wives maybe have amongst themselves, and the status within the family as well, okay? In terms of, obviously the male is the head of the household, but I think you could consider there's even status among the wives. Of course, you're going to want to consider people's status in the community as a whole and the importance the Igbo people place on status and how that status is actually built and what it means to not have status. Okay, a man who's an agbala in society, he's not really a woman, but he doesn't have a title, so he's really no better than a woman. There's the answer to that question. Hint, hint. Consider the concept of what it means to be heroic. What's their definition of hero? We spent a lot of first semester talking about heroes and what it means to be a hero. So what would it mean in this particular society? What did they value in terms of masculinity and warriors and that heroic concept? Consider their ideas about law and justice. How do they administer justice? How do they determine what their laws are and what's punishable and what they're going to believe and what they're going to do? Think about the relationships between parents and children. That's been developed quite a bit and will continue to be so later. Okonkwo's favorite child is his daughter because she's strong and she behaves like a man. And then there's Nwoye, who really doesn't have anything in common with his family, and he certainly doesn't fit in to a society that placed such emphasis on those overly masculine characteristics. And then, of course, keep considering those gender roles, because obviously you have seen the role of women in the society, how they're placed in a lower status, but then those hints of that reverence. Their god Agbala is a woman. It is a priestess that speaks to the oracle. And how about that elderly ruler? I forgot his name. And it talks about how powerful and respected he is. But then it also talks about like how he doesn't really do anything without talking to his wife first. So there is some hidden reference in there. And then I want you to consider the title. Guys, this is called Things Fall Apart for a reason. We need to be thinking about why. What is it that falls apart? Why does it fall apart? And throughout the rest of this week and on into next week, I'm going to keep kind of, going to that and looking at some ideas about why things fall apart and what it is that's falling apart and could any of this be prevented? So part 2 of Things Fall Apart focuses on Okonkwo's time in exile. As I already said, his reaction to that exile and then how he has to kind of rebuild from there. And it also, in addition to looking at his life in this new land, this new lifestyle he's been forced into, it also incorporates his thoughts and reactions to the news that he's getting about what's going on back in Umuofia. Because obviously these the white men, these Christian missionaries, they've already been introduced in the novel, but we haven't really seen them a whole lot. And especially not as much as we're going to in parts 2 and 3. And so Okonkwo's hearing more and more about the changes that are taking place in his homeland, and he has a real reaction to that. Remember, this is a man who is 100% complete buy-in with this Igbo culture that he has been striving with for his entire life. He strives for success within the rules and constraints of this society. And he's been very, very successful. And all of that, little by little, is getting torn away, partly because of his exile, and now because of the arrival of these outsiders who have all kinds of new and crazy ideas. I would ask you to consider who among the Igbo people is going to be most likely to embrace these ideas of the white man. I may have mentioned that in one of my previous videos, and I think it's very important. You have several groups that would be considered outcasts in this society, like the Osu, which were like dedicated to the gods, but they didn't live with the people. They weren't really even allowed to. And then you had the Afalafu, which would have been people in society that had no value, no honor. Men without titles would have been considered that. These were the misfits, the Osu and the Efelefu. They were the outcasts. And they didn't conform to the norms of the Igbo society, and so they didn't have that same value from their peers and community members, and certainly didn't have that same level of status and respect. So notice their reaction to these new ideas that come along, and then certain individuals that are also maybe a little bit on the outside of society, and why they might be particularly interested in some of the ideas of the white man. So part 2 deals with that, and then part 3, Okonkwo gets to go home. So he gets to return to Umuofia. And in that section, you really want to pay attention to how things have stayed the same, and more importantly, how things have changed. And then how does Okonkwo fit into that? Does he even fit into that anymore with his very old school mindset? What kind of conflict will arise between him and his fellow Igbo people, between him and the white men, especially because he suddenly finds himself under the power and authority of an outside entity, the British Crown, who has set themselves up as, the ruling figures. And that's never existed for these people before. He's always been a ruling figure. And so the idea that he has to answer to someone else's ideas of law and justice, right, that's going to be very hard. And then, pay attention to some of those other characters, Obierica, Enzima, Nwoye, and some of their reactions as well, because in parts 2 and 3, that's got to be our focus. How and why do things fall apart? And then how do these various characters react to the changes that come with the imposition of ideas from the white man, the British missionaries, Western civilization? All right. I'll be back to visit with you guys some more tomorrow. For now, you need to be reading part 2. I would say read chapters probably 14 through about 18 or 19 so that we can be finished with the book by the beginning of next week. All right. Until tomorrow then, have a wonderful day.